Special thanks to Affordable Prestige Cars, a name which many of you will of course recognise from my previous Jag content, for providing the F-Type in this review. They are of course based in the southwest of England, in Glastonbury, so if you're in the market for something like an F-Type, like an S-Type, an XJ, an XK, then chances are they've probably got at least something that's close to what you're looking for, and could maybe even source you a car if you are so inclined. For the vast majority of my returning subscribers who are checking out this review, I would wager good money that you've probably watched a Jag review from me before. Chances are an XK of some kind. And I even did a rivals match between this, or the F-Type in general, and the XK, wherein we tried to sift through which car is better for what kind of buyer. And it's a justified question because they are similar, but at the same time very, very different in a number of key ways. I would summarise it by saying that the XK is a pure long-distance GT with elegance, comfort and torque over everything else, whereas the F-Type is more of a pure sports car with some GT leanings, with the two-seat layout, more of a compact approach, and more of an overt approach to performance rather than comfort. It's not uncomfortable, but it's not really about comfort. That's the difference between the two. However, this is not the first time I've talked about an F-Type, because I talked about the open top with the V6 engine, the S version before, and as great as it was in its own way, and it often gets a ton of praise because of just how good it sounds, which it deserves, it simply didn't grab me in the same way that an XK does, because it's just a personal preference thing. On that note though, that is why I was so keen to try one of these. Would it be another underwhelming experience for me, or could this actually come close, or could it maybe even surpass my love for an XK? Well, spoiler alert, I do still prefer the XK, so for my fellow fans, you can stop sweating, but the F-Type R is infinitely better to me than the V6. And the reason why is actually kind of simple. Now, there's no way of saying this without annoying certain F-Type owners, so I'm just going to say it as I believe it is. The V6 is a very, very good sports car. For people who don't really care if it's a Jag or not. This is a Jaguar super sports car. Everything about it is very Jag. The way it looks, sounds, growls, snarls, slides, and absolutely rips your face off with straight line performance. The V6 simply doesn't do that. The V6 is too nice for that. It's fast, but there are different kinds of fast. That one is very quick. This one is visceral. It's noisy. It's more like a modern day muscle car, and that is one of the things I love the most about the XKR. For this particular review though, I actually looked up some figures which I don't think I've referenced before. I might have, I've done so many Jag videos I could have forgotten it at this point, but I actually wanted once and for all to look up the actual size difference between an F-Type like this one and an XK, because I wanted to see if what I felt driving the car was accurate or not. And it actually turns out it's bang on, because I've always felt that the F-Type feels significantly shorter, but also kind of wider and chunkier and more squat almost than an XK. Well, that's spot on, because that's exactly how they compare. Interestingly, the XK though is actually taller, which surprised me. It looks sleeker because of its length, but it is the taller of the two cars. And I think when I'm inside the car, you can sort of see that. My head is a lot closer to the roof, let's put it that way, and because of the fact that it's a strict two-seater, the seat adjustment is no way near as comprehensive as, for example, an XK is, with the open or closed top. I never wanted for space in an XK. In an F-Type, the limitations of headroom and legroom are much more apparent. So a super tall driver, someone who's way beyond me, like a 6'6", 6'7", well, I'm sure you could fit in it, and I'm sure there are people who will comment saying that they are that tall, but it's not as easy to fit in it as it is with an XKR. In terms of the length, that's the biggest difference. In fact, the XK is a full 13 inches longer than an F-Type. Curiously though, most of that is overhang. The amount that the front and rear end hangs out over the wheels is what makes up most of that difference. The wheelbase difference is not quite as crazy. 13 inches longer overall is actually only 4.8 inches longer on wheelbase. So that is a hell of a lot of overhang on the XKR. And curiously, when I looked up the width difference between these two platforms, it's exactly what I said it felt like. The F-Type is indeed wider, 1.2 inches wider overall than the XK. So it's interesting how they kind of trade blows back and forth in terms of length and width. But why am I bringing up all of these numbers? Well, actually, because they make a huge difference to how the car feels. It's not just about practicality or space, because chances are if you're looking at buying an F-Type at all, you're probably already aware you're going to be taking a hit on practicality, because the boot is so much smaller, you've only got 2 seats, and it's pretty apparently a physically smaller car. At least it looks that way, and that is correct. It's more about the driving feel, which is the reason why I'm bringing this up though. See, the added length and the slightly narrower track of the XK gives it more of a, what I would call swooping kind of handling. It loves long, curving corners, and it's more of that pure Grand Tourer vibe. It feels super precise until you drive an F-Type. An F-Type feels like it's just so much more focused than an XK. You take the best, most powerful XK around, and it still can barely feel as focused as this. An R, which is not even the top of the tree. The SVR is even faster still. Now, I'm not saying this to belittle the XK. Of course, I still love it, and as I said, I still prefer the XK overall. But to me, it's that handling feel which, above all else, will decide which one you prefer over time. If you plan to own these and use them every day, I could see someone finding, for example, an F-Type R like this one, maybe too taxing. It feels like a car that's just about comfortable and sedate enough to drive, but it always wants to play. The front end is lighter than an F-Type. That significantly shorter length makes it so much sharper and more responsive through corners, but the fact that it has all-wheel drive, that's in this particular form of course, some do, some don't, depending on the model, well, it just gives it a completely different personality. So what's it like to drive on its own? Well, the grip is great, but it also has just a slight hint of Audi R8 to it. And one of the things that I mentioned in my review for that car is that I felt that the front end was lighter than I liked. And I said at the time, I'm fully aware that I'm in the minority, because plenty of people find the R8 to be a fantastic handling car. Now to me, this reminded me of that. It's not as bad because it's front engine, so it's more predictable, but the front end had a little bit more lightness to it, which when you're pushing it really hard is great because it makes it super precise. Actually kind of reminds me of a Maserati Quattroporte in that way, which has a fantastic front end through corners, but the disadvantage is it could sometimes be a little bit too precise and playful for daily calm use. To me, that once again highlights the difference between the V6 and the V8. The V6, put simply, is a car that I think you should buy if you want a really nice sports car, but don't particularly care if it's a Jag. This is a super GT car, or a super sports car more accurately, for people who want a Jaguar super sports car specifically. Personally, the biggest advantage that this has over an XK, in my opinion, is the all-wheel drive. Some people reel at the thought of all-wheel drive because, oh, you can't drift, it does too much of the work for you. Trust me, if you're saying that, you've clearly never driven an all-wheel drive F-Type. This is no Nissan GT-R. It does not do all the work for you, and you can definitely get the tail out. What it does do, though, is give you that precious bit of extra grip over the front end, which makes a huge difference to launch off the line, and can mean the difference between keeping and losing control in anything but perfect weather. So in other words, it's more British than the XK. It's more realistic in terms of how all-weather a car it can be, which is ironic given that this is more of a sports car, and you'd kind of think that the GT would be more practical in that way. Now overall, you're going to pay a lot more for something like this than most XKs, so this is really one of those situations where I would strongly suggest that if you love the F-Type, I don't think you even should be dissuaded from it. I prefer the XK, many of you who follow my reviews prefer the XK, and there are plenty of reasons to do so. However, there are also plenty of things to love about the F-Type, especially this one over the V6 in my opinion. It's that much better in every way as far as I'm concerned, and for somebody who maybe is currently an XK owner who wants to maybe branch out and get an F-Type, or maybe dip their toe into the water and see what the difference feels like, just to see if they made the right choice, definitely drive the V8. The R version in this form is so much more familiar to an XK owner, but at the same time it does a fantastic job of standing on its own 2 feet. The performance is ballistic, the handling is fantastic, the proportions manage to feel almost chunky and muscular but also quite compact at the same time, and in that sense I actually found the F-Type to be very similar to the Mercedes AMG GT. And if you're curious about that car, I did a review way back for one of those as well, the GTS in particular. They're cars which are quite big, but then they're kind of not big at the same time. They look larger than their actual dimensions are, but then when you're sitting in it, it feels big and chunky, almost like a supercar. It's almost this weird TARDIS situation, or a reverse TARDIS of some kind, but it's a fantastic place to be. It's a lovely car in terms of how much effort they put into it. It doesn't have the classic vibe of an XK, but it feels much more like a new money Jag. This feels like a step into a new era. And as much as many of us would have loved to have stayed a little bit longer in the old era, I don't think this is by any stretch a bad choice by Jaguar. And for all of that extra performance and all-wheel drive grip and just sheer snarling spec sheet, which this one has, you don't really even have to sacrifice that much in terms of using it every day. I already mentioned, of course, you're going to lose some space, but fuel economy, for example, not that much different to an XKR. In fact, it's a little bit better. The average is around 25 to the gallon in some cases. Now, chances are you're probably not going to be running that, because if you've got a 186 mile an hour Jag, you're probably going to be pushing it pretty hard, but it can at least do that if you need it to. Ultimately, I think it's a great example of what Jaguar can do with a new approach, but in a very similar way to how people feel about the newest, or currently the last, XJ forms. Compared to the traditional old man's Jag, XJ, there are a lot of people who don't like that new money feel. I think that is exactly the case here as well. Jaguar pivoted hard from the XK into this. They did it unapologetically. They didn't even try to make up for it in any kind of way by making, oh, here's a 2+2 version, here's a version that's more like an XK. They didn't do that. They stuck to their guns, they made it what it is, and they made it faster and faster and better and better. That's the key thing. To me, that is the key reason, in fact, why this V8 is so much better than the V6. It takes what is nice and good and pleasant about the V6 version, and it dials it up to 11, which is exactly where it feels like it should be. This car needs as much performance as it can get, whereas with an XK, I don't feel that way. Take, for example, the one that I bought. I chose the 4.2 quite deliberately over the 5 litre, because even though it was far slower, far less powerful, I just liked the driving experience more. With the F-Type, this is much more what I would call like a Clarkson style car. More power, more speed, and it feels better for it. That is a testament to just how different the two platforms are, in my opinion. So if you get the chance to drive one, absolutely do so. And overall, I would say it's certainly a positive review in my book. I like this one a lot more than my first F-Type experience, and I'm glad to say that it's kind of turned me around a little bit on liking the F-Type. I still don't love it, but I like it a hell of a lot more than I did before. Ultimately, that's it for my thoughts. Tell me yours down below if you're an owner of a version of the F-Type, if you used to have one, even just your thoughts between the XK and the F-Type. Drop all of those down below. Of course, if you are curious about more Jag content, there's plenty of that here on the channel as well. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.